Hello and welcome to Mekelle Foresight. This is Mekelle, producer and host of the show. Today I have a guest, Yosief Ghebrehiwet, activist and writer on issues on Horn of Africa. Yosief Ghebrehiwet, welcome to Mekelle Foresight.
Thank you very much, and thanks also for our listeners.
Thank you. The Eritrean government has now come clearly to the forefront in this war on Tigray. It has become the main architect in the political and military front. So where do you think is the Eritrean government heading now?
Well, it's a long story, but if I am to come up with a short answer, I would say it's heading to a double suicide. Not only of itself, by itself, I mean Sha'biya as an organization, or the EPLF, or you could call it the Yosief regime. It has been at the top of the helm for about 50 years, starting its liberation days, almost half a century. Now, the suicide that I'm talking about is not only of itself, but also of the Eritrean nation itself. That is the short answer. But a longer version of that one would require a further explanation. Here is a metaphor that I have been using in the article that I wrote almost 15 years ago called Romanticizing the or Romanticizing Revolution. I used the parasite-host metaphor. When a parasite keeps devouring the insides of its host, it will never stop and think, I should moderate my appetite, because if the host dies, then I will die. It could never think that way. It will keep devouring simply because it's the only way it will survive. We could say it's wired that way. It is in its DNA. So is Sha'biya. Sha'biya is a parasite, and the Eritrean body has been its host for 50 years. If we focus only on the 30 years of the so-called independence years, it has been hollowing out the insides of Eritrea voraciously. It's a voracious parasite. It has the economy has been entirely gutted out. The social fabric of Eritrea, religion, tradition, legality, history, and so forth, has been fiercely attacked. The social fabric has been entirely tattered. Normal life, as we know it, doesn't exist in Eritrea. Then there is one of the greatest enemies, so-called enemies, in the head of Sha'biya is the nuclear family. It competes with the nuclear family for the possession of its kids. So it has been attacking the nuclear family for 30-odd years. Almost all of the families in Eritrea now have either, sons and daughters that have died in the various wars, or the rest are wandering in the Eritrean wilderness in the national service, and most of them have already left the country. So we could say that it has been devouring the youth of Eritrea, in general. All of this is being done for the quest is for total control. By total, I mean totalitarian control. It believes that unless it has total control over the population, and especially over the young generation, then it will lose control over Eritrea. Now, the total mobilization that we are seeing today is a continuation of that parasite devouring Eritrea. For example, let me focus only on the demography part. In order to fully grasp the nature of this total mobilization, we will have to focus on its demographics as a continuation of what has been going on for the last 24 years. That is after the border war of 1998 and 2000. The mass exodus of hundreds of thousands of young men and women, nowadays it's believed to reach almost 1 million of them, is a result of that process. If you look at the Sawa conscription place, in Eritrea, there has been 34 rounds of conscription in these 30 years. And every year, average about 20,000 go through military training in that camp. Now, if you multiply it, you will get 680,000. Already 680,000 have been trained and left the camp of Sawa. Then they go through the indefinite national service. But this is the crux of the matter. More than 680,000 of young men and women have fled the country in that time, during that mass exodus. As most of them are either, the overwhelming majority of them are either deserters, they have deserted the army and the national service, or entirely conscription evaders. Those that have refused even to be conscripted and then fled to Sudan. Previously, it used also to be to Tigrai also. Now, it means that the EDF or the national service or the army, the Eritrean army, has been unable to retain the overwhelming majority of its recruits. That's why the army now is hollowed out. If you have carefully followed, for example, the Eritrean prisoners, if you have seen the demography of the Eritrean prisoners, you will see its majority represented either by underage or teenagers, or the overage, and now increasingly women. What you don't see over there is the most potent part of what should have been the most potent part of the army. The young men between 20 and 40 are what you see missing. Those are the ones that have left the country. This one, by the way, reflects the demography of Eritrea. If you see in festivals in Asmara, for example, you will see it's represented by women, mainly above 30 years old, underage kids, and old men. This has become the demography of Eritrea in general, and the army reflects that part. As a result of this mass exodus, then we can say it's not only the army that has been hollowed out of this most potent group, those aged between 20 and 40, but also the nation itself. The nation has lost almost 1 million young men and women. If they had been retained inside Eritrea, it means those are the people that could have raised families. So in general, roughly we could say that about 3 million or 4 million people have been lost in Eritrea. That's why it's now only 3 million people. So you see the trajectory from the beginning that it's going to a double suicide. So because of you see that not only the death of Sha'biya itself, but also it wants to take with it, down the drains, the whole nation itself. So I see this double suicide in the making.
So the Eritrean government has had these numbers for 30 years, be it in the army in particular or the nation in general. If so, how is it possible for the Eritrean government not to see this inevitable end of what it has been heading to?
Okay, so how is it that Sha'biya doesn't see that it's heading towards this double suicide? Well, one of the things that I talked about on the first was that it cannot. Let me put it in the form of a dilemma. On the one hand, the mass exodus has served as a safety valve for the Sha'biya regime, for the Sha'biya as an organization. It has to keep devouring young men and women if it's going to survive. That's obvious. Again, let me focus on the demographic aspect only to highlight this phenomena. If it was to totally control this young population, then it felt that it needed to do two things. First, it has to win them out of their families as early as possible when they are teenagers. Usually it's 16, 17 years. takes them to Sawa, molds them in the shape of Sha'biya, as they call it, in the shape of Tagadalai. This is an Orwellian experimentation that has been going on for 30 years, one that has totally failed, but nevertheless, Sha'biya feels the only way it could survive is by molding the nation in the shape of itself. So it has to fight against the family. That's why I call it its primary enemy. It considers its primary enemy in Eritrea is the nuclear family. But at the same time also, it has to take them out of the cities and towns from Eritrea. The reason is, if it leaves them inside the towns and cities in Eritrea, let's take Asmara only, which is about 500,000 population. Now it has entirely gutted out the younger population, the younger generation from Asmara. It started by closing the Asmara University, precisely because it was afraid that if it leaves the young population inside the cities, at a certain point in time, they could rebel. Allah, for example, the Arab Spring. So, especially after the Arab Spring, that was the fear that Sha'biya had. But that's not, even in the national service, it felt that, for example, let's say out of this almost 1 million people that have left Eritrea, conservatively, if we estimate that 2/3 of them, about 650,000 of them, were trained inside the camp. If all of those had remained inside Eritrea, forget about the seats, even in the country, even in the countryside as soldiers in the national service, it's clear that at a certain point it would have erupted, it would have imploded. So for Sha'biya, so in order to remain safe, Sha'biya needed first to drive them out from the cities and towns of Eritrea. It did that. And then second, it realized also that if it forcibly holds them inside Eritrea, then it could implode. So for Sha'biya, the 20,000 or so that were leaving every year Eritrea was a safety valve. It needed the exodus, the mass exodus was necessary for Sha'biya to survive, because if it had retained those people, already things would have gone out of control. So on the one hand, then it has avoided, it has prevented mass rebellion by forcing the most potent group inside Eritrea, the Foresight generation or the young generation or the 20 to 40 years, by forcing them out of Eritrea. And most of those people are rebellious, the ones that leave. That also is an additional advantage for Sha'biya. So the key word is safety valve. It was necessary for Sha'biya to drive the kids out of the towns first in order to prevent an implosion inside the cities and towns, especially Asmara. And then second, from out of the national service, because they could also, they are armed, you know, if they conduct a rebellion, then it would be lethal. So that was, so like exactly as a parasite, you know, the parasite metaphor comes over here. At that point in time, it cannot think anything else. It cannot think the long-range consequences of what it is doing. It simply is focused on survival of day-to-day, on the day-to-day basis. But that is the one part of the dilemma. The second part of the dilemma is the one that you have mentioned. Even as focused as they are on their survival, they couldn't have missed where the demographics is heading. They couldn't have missed the fact that almost 20,000 years they have it, you know, they have it with them. Not only on the impact that it has on the military, but on the general population. The population has been declining. Even Isaias himself, in his latest speech, ironically, he said, I remember, that we are not, we don't have, you know, we are not blessed with population, you know, which is amazing, because he is himself, he is the one reason why the population is going down in Eritrea. Now, okay, so the problem is, why doesn't it realize it? As I said before, at that point in time, it was, even now, it is impossible, even though it has realized lately that it has come to a serious, it's facing with a serious problem, especially in this war, when it comes to this war. Still, it's going on the way it has been going on before. It's doing exactly the same things that drove the young population to flee outside of Eritrea. For example, during those 2 past years, they have carefully noted that even at the demographics of, even at the stature of the army in Eritrea, there is a lot of change. The reason is tens of thousands of Eritreans have already escaped to Sudan in these 2 years to escape conscription, inside Eritrea. And many of those who were already conscripted, precisely because most of the fighting that has been going on around, for example, Humara, all the way to Matamma, in that area, and Hajar in that area, the Eritrean soldiers were at the border. And that was a good opportunity for many Eritreans, for young men, to simply flee to Sudan, because deep from inside Eritrea, you would have many problems to trespass. But at that age, anyway, what I'm trying to say is that even now, even as it realizes that it is heading towards a disaster, it couldn't prevent itself from doing what it has been doing before. So we have exactly we go back to the same problem. It knows that what it is doing, it knows that its army has been hollowed out. It knows that the nation is heading downward, yet it doesn't see any other option. The only way it could survive, even at this point, is by devouring, the young population again. So it cannot stop. It's almost, that's why I call it suicide. There is no way for it to stop, even as it realizes the end is coming.
So, are you saying that the Eritrean leadership will be, in this cycle of dilemma, or is there anything that it's doing to come out of this dilemma?
Well, yes, there's always, a solution, but it's an odd kind of solution that, as usual, it's an abnormal solution that Sha'biya has. It's a very, in fact, it gives us a window to how Sha'biya functions. It gives us an insight into its thinking, process. Now, for example, if you look at this, okay, 2 choices it has. The parasite, keeps devouring its, let's say a thinking parasite like Sha'biya, the insides of its host, which is the Eritrean nation. Then there are 2 ideas. It cannot stop precisely because the moment it stops, it will die itself, because that's how it survives, by devouring the insides of Eritrea. So what could it do to prevent its eventual death? Well, there are 2 things. It will seek another host. It will have to jump from that host that it's killing. Then it will have to go to another host to survive. So that is how Sha'biya is functioning right now. There are 2 hosts that it has targeted right now. One is found inside Eritrea. The other is from Ethiopia itself. Now, how does it do that? Well, if you have been following me, right, I have been focusing on the young generation of Eritrea. That is the main focus, the main victims of Sha'biya. That have been the main victims of Sha'biya. Now, it realizes that there is not that many left anyway inside Eritrea. It will still focus on them. It's still devouring them. So indeed, the devouring process is still going on, but at the same time, it's trying to replace them because it knows that there is only a limited number and they are not enough to be a host themselves. That's why, as I previously mentioned, it's shifting on the weakest part of the population. It's eating the weakest part of the population right now. Which ones are they? The overage, as I told you, the 50, 60, and 65 years old. The younger. Nowadays, the Eritrean army, a good chunk of it is made up of child soldiers, even children and underage. And then the woman that has been to some extent spared up to recent time, are now being forced to enter in large numbers. So what it is doing is, it has jumped from the young men and women. It's still devouring them, but it's also now devouring those population groups that are the weakest part of Eritrea. That's one way. It's still towards its death, but it only wants to extend its life. Only wants to extend its life that way. But the most interesting part is it has found out that this is not enough. Eritrea would collapse, facing especially Tigray, the TDF, with the weakest part of the population making up the overwhelming majority of its army. So what is it trying to do is, it is planning, well, it's doing it, in fact, not planning. It's bringing a huge number of armies from Ethiopia as a host now, as a host. So it's so that it could, it depends on them to survive, to extend its life. Almost more than 100,000, I believe now. The last time I heard was and some 2 or 3 commando divisions. All in all, there are more than 100,000 Ethiopians right now in Eritrea, replacing. Remember that the gap that they are replacing is the gap left by the mass exodus of Eritreans outside. How do you feel that gap? One is bring the children, women, and the old men from Eritrea. The second part is bring anybody else from outside that could get in. There is one thing probably that highlights this phenomena, the Somali case. Remember the Somali case? About 5,000 of Somalis came to be trained in Eritrea, and then they participated inside Tigray. They did participate, although they left about after 3 months or so. Remember, why people are still wondering, why did Isaias say no to the president of Somalia? Give me back my trained soldiers. And Isaias said no. The reason is exactly because he was planning this war. He kept them until this war because he wants them also part of the host. He wants them to be part of that host structure. But that host structure is now, you see, made up of these different groups. So all that Sha'biya thinks is now, how do I extend my life? And this is exactly what it is trying to do, even though that too is not gonna take long last. But Sha'biya doesn't think that way. It thinks only about now. Okay, I will have the young, the older women from Eritrea, and then the Somali, the Amharas, the rest of the Ethiopians, and those will be my new hosts in order to survive for a few years from now. Yeah.
So what is Eritrea doing now in this round of the war, in this latest renewed fighting?
Well, again, we always have to think in terms of the survival of Sha'biya, of that organization, the EPLF, you might call it that liberation, if you are going to call it through their liberation years. What are they doing? Okay. They understand now that unless Tigray is vanquished, their years are probably short. Not only that, probably it will be decided, their fate will be decided within this war itself. So there is this fear. So they have decided that one of the first thing that they decided, by any means necessary, they will have to reach Mekelle. As General Tzadkan has gave us some numbers, about 750,000 army, about 750,000 of both Ethiopian and Eritrean army is arrayed against 200 or 250,000 Tigrayan army. Now, all of this was done with one particular. This have to be the end of Tigray. This have to be there. We have to reach Mekelle. Only if we reach Mekelle, would Sha'biya reassure itself of its existence. Forget about Eritrea. Eritrea has never been in their head. They believe that if Sha'biya goes, they don't give a damn about Eritrea, whether they take Eritrea with them. That was the first one. Now it seems that they are not sure, although they are trying. You know, they have already gone to Shire, and they have heard that today they did advance eastwards, Tigrai, towards Tigrai. So they are still hoping, to some extent, although they are not sure right now, after 3 or 4 major defeats, they still want to, they are still trying desperately to reach Mekelle, which I doubt they believe it even themselves right now. The second one that they are trying to do is, if this fails, what Eritrea is trying to do is probably occupy more Tigrayan space. And then, let's say, for some odd reason, there would be some kind of ceasefire. And then the siege continues as it has been before. So the siege has to continue. That is on the Eritrean side. Even though the siege itself now has a double-edged sword for Eritrea, not for Ethiopia. The siege for Ethiopia is good because it could manage, although it had economic problems. If you look at the demographic shape on Ethiopia, I mean, with 120 million, there is no shortage of men. So that's not the issue with Ethiopia. But Eritrea cannot afford a long siege, even against Tigray, a long siege, because precisely at this moment, almost the entire Eritrean families wanted to send their kids away from Eritrea. More Eritreans are leaving the army by mass exodus, rather than by casualties. So, if the siege continues, Eritrea also will face a huge problem. Any kind of peace in between, any kind of ceasefire in between would be detrimental to Eritrea. The entire use of Eritrea would leave the country. So it cannot afford it. Although its second choice is, of course, maintaining the siege. The last one is defending the Eritrean territory. Defending the Eritrean territory because that would be the last resort, the last resort. Just dig in the trenches, put there, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, both Amhara, Ethiopian, and Eritreans, and stay there to defend Eritrea. I'm not sure whether the Ethiopians would be willing to do that indefinitely, but that is the last resort that Eritrea has in mind.
So what do you think the Eritrean government dreads now most? And what do you think how do you think the war will end?
Well, I think there are two main things that the Eritrean government dreads most at this point in time. One is heavy casualties. If you remember, throughout the war, Eritrea has been fighting with the strategy of Eritrea has been how to preserve its army. From the very beginning, there was this strategy of putting in the front, the armies of the allies. It could be the Amharas, it could be the Ethiopian army. Recently, for example, if you have heard carefully, the first 5 prisoners that were being interviewed in the Afar front, they would tell you all of them, the Afar were in front. The Afars were in front of us. That was all of them, they were saying that. So they followed the same strategy that they had been following before. They put the allies armies in the front. Once they weaken, the logic is once they weaken the TDF army in that battle, then the Eritreans get in. Up to that battle, though, they only provide a cover of heavy armies covering artillery, tanks, and stuff like that. It didn't work out in the Afar case precisely because the Afars were smart ones, unlike the Amharas and the Ethiopian army. They realized exactly what is going to happen, and they escaped quickly. They left them, exposed. That's why almost 5 divisions of Eritreans were destroyed in the attempt to reach Mekelle through, however foolish it was, through the Afar front. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that has been the modus operandi of the Eritrean army, because it knows that it doesn't have that many people, for reasons that I have explained before, and precisely because of that, it knows that it cannot afford to take heavy casualties the way, for example, the Amhara forces and the Ethiopian forces have been taking. In one battle, 10,000, 20,000 are dead, 5,000 or so are captured. For Eritrea, 2 of those kinds of battles would totally destroy the entire army. So that has been its now though it feels it realizes that this time around it cannot escape from fully involving itself, even though it has a huge number of of Ethiopians and so forth. It feels that this time around it has to involve itself if it is going to save Eritrea, according to the. So that is the number one thing that this government dreads: heavy casualty. It cannot take heavy casualty. That's one. The second one is probably much more than the first one, is Eritrea is afraid that it could turn out to be a battleground itself. Remember, the battles that are going on are right there, are right at the border areas. The Tigrayans have had experience of invaders getting into their place, and they have successfully fought them and drove them back, drove them out of Tigray, because there is this cohesive population that feels the existential threat, and they act as one people. But in Eritrea, it's a different story. If certain part, if TDF succeeds in pushing Eritrea, say for example, through the way it did at the border war, let's say to Hombia, that area, the Gash area, or in Saraya, the Kwahain area, or in Kolokzai, the Shimazana area, if it manages to enter, the fear that the nation would entirely collapse for various reasons. Let me give you quickly some of the reasons. The first one is economic one. It means that the main source of economy for Eritrea right now are the mining companies. Those are the ones that are providing hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Those companies will instantly disappear. They will leave Eritrea. They will pack their whatever it is that they have to pack and leave. The moment they hear that the TDF has entered Eritrean territory. That's number one. The second one, I am still on the economic part, is the tourism aspect. Tourism in quotation marks, because there is no such tourism as the world knows. For foreigners, these are diaspora Eritreans, tens of thousands of them, that has made almost a pilgrimage to go to Eritrea, mainly supporters of the regime, but also the others, that want to visit their families and so forth. Tens of thousands of them visit Eritrea every year, and this bring with them the much coveted hard currency, which is estimated to be hundreds of millions of dollars with them, which the government manipulates. It gets almost 2/3 of that hard currency. It only provides the 1/3 to the family. So this has been one of the main sources of income for the Eritrean regime. This will also instantly disappear. Already, the Eritrean tourists or the Eritrean diaspora Eritreans are getting out of Eritrea, and none of them would dare now to go to visit Eritrea. That would be another economic consequences. The other one is the border provinces. If you look at the border provinces of Eritrea, Gash, Sarai, and Hazomo, the Hazomo area, these are the most fertile areas in Eritrea. That means if the war is conducted in those areas, it is the main source, the main agricultural source will also disappear. So there is a logistical problem that it is finding it very hard. If you have heard recently, whenever it recruits forcibly, I mean, from different areas, both from the urban and rural areas, its instruction has been bring a blanket and dry fruits, korensho or tahini, as you say, dry fruits. Imagine, it's almost like a feudal area where you bring your own supply, with you, So why is this doing? Because it doesn't have enough resources to go around. Now, imagine, getting attacked, from TDF inside Eritrea. So that logistical problem would get much worse. The second one is I'm trying to. That's the economic part. The second biggest thing that it fears from Eritrea turns to be a battleground is the displacement problem. Remember in 1998 and 2000 time, around that time, the border area, hundreds of thousands, probably almost 1 million, I believe, Eritreans were displaced, even from that small area. Besides, those areas that I told you, the border areas, the fertile border areas, those are relatively the most densely populated areas. So any incursion towards those areas will produce a huge amount of displacement, probably 500,000 or 1 million of them. And they are not going to stay, believe me, they are not going to stay inside Eritrea, given the plethora of problems that Eritrea has. All of them will head toward Sudan, exacerbating, worsening both the population and the army situation in Eritrea. And besides, this would also have economic effect to the ones that I have enumerated before. The third one is on the military itself. Remember, the discontent among the people, especially among those who are forced to fight, is very high. And they are looking for any excuse to desert the army. If the TDF makes it inside Eritrea, many of them will head towards Sudan, as I said before. Many of them will switch sides, both for opportunistic reasons and for some other reasons. So there would be a meltdown among the army. It's the same thing that faces all totalitarian nations. In Cambodia, the same thing happened when they began, a border dispute with Vietnam. They thought that the Cambodian army, the Cambodian people, would be patriotic enough to fight against Vietnam, but it didn't happen. So because they were already traumatized, they have been already traumatized by 4 years of the Pol Pot or Khmer Rouge. So the same thing will happen inside Eritrea. The discontent level is so high that a meltdown of the army will happen. In addition to that one, there is a zero chance that Eritreans would go to the bush or to Sahel or to the mountains, to conduct armed resistance. That is not going to happen at all. Remember the way the TDF was formed by going to the mountains, But in Eritrea, first of all, these 40 or 50 years of abuse have exhausted the spirit of Eritreans. The idea of a liberation movement, again, is inconceivable. In fact, not only has it lost its luster, those years of liberation movement, but also it is now it goes the very idea of the liberation goes side by side with all the host of calamities that has happened on the earth. It's associated with all the things that that went wrong in Eritrea. So there wouldn't be anyone who would be willing to fight the war in the mountains. Now, as there is an additional, in Tigray, the people are more or less one people. Even even if you look at the demographic aspect of Tigrinya speaking, mostly Christians and stuff like that, 90% Christians, even though all of them are together fighting right now. There is this cohesion of being one, this sense of being one people. In Eritrea, it's not so. The division is deep inside Eritrea. It has been worsened by, it had been made worse by Sha'biya, of course. But there is ethnic division. There is deep religious division. There is even divisions among the Aurajas. So these are not the kind of people that could go to the wilderness and fight for Eritrea. The fourth and last one is very important to realize: the psychological impact that a TDF presence inside Eritrea would have. The psychological is huge, even if it is a small part of Eritrea. First, the myth of the invincibility of Sha'biya would be shattered once and for all. I don't think it has ever been invincible, but to many people, especially to Ethiopians, to the Amhara elite, there is this idea that Eritrea will save them. That's why they are sending their soldiers, to fight side by side with Eritrea. Now, that myth will be entirely shattered. The idea, imagine, for example, the idea of propping up a dying regime, a regime that is defending itself, somewhere in Eritrea, would be unappealing to the Amhara elite or to the Ethiopian elite. In fact, if they can, they would get out of Eritrea if they could. At least they wouldn't add any more soldiers over there, because they are there not precisely because they believe that the Eritrean army is invincible and it would help them to reach Mekelle. So they will fight if they think they are going to reach Mekelle. But if they realize that at one point in time that they are not, they will never reach Mekelle, but they are defending the Eritrean regime, they are dying inside Eritrea or defending the Eritrean regime, then that appeal would be lost. So it would have a huge psychological impact also on Ethiopians, but on Eritreans, of course, similarly it would have. But as I said above, we have seen how they would react. On the outside world also, the outside world, it's more or less might more than right. We have seen how the West has been scandalously approaching this problem. It has been a total cowardice, and at the same time, they have been only working for. At this point in time, the Tigray war is being handled as an appendix, to the Ukraine war. If they have to do, the Americans are thinking, in order to save the Ukraine war, they are doing everything all over the world, And one of the things that they are doing in Africa is, how do we have the Africans with us, How do we win them out from Russia and China? So in that process, they believe Ethiopia would be indispensable. So anything that Ethiopia does here, they will support it. But if they see the balance of power shifting towards TDF, which means that would be the case if they did enter inside Eritrean soil, I'm sure even them would try to find out, will try to at least be sincere in the peace proposals that they would bring to the table. So more or less, what I'm saying is that this is the way it's heading to. This is the way that Eritrea dreads. So, but the last question that he had asked, where do you think it is heading? Well, to me, the only way, uh, you are muted.
I was trying to say, the last question is, how do you think will the war end?
With our end, yeah. Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, I don't want to answer this kind of questions because it's very hard, to say which way it goes. But I have a full trust or what do you, full confidence in the TDF, in what the TDF has been doing. My only problem is this, uh, the kind of wars that has been fought so far. For example, it's almost the third time. For the third time, that the TDF has been have been successful in weakening, if not totally wiping out the Ethiopian army. This is the third time it's doing it. But the problem has always been if there is a gap in time in between, let's say, for example, the last time it was a 9 months gap that was created by the ceasefire. Then Ethiopia had no problem in teaching almost 1 million soldiers in between, and then it's as if nothing has happened before. You restart the war, So what should the TDF do in such a case where you will have an enemy that never ends, I think it's in my UMD media, I gave this example of an invincible warrior, what could it was a thought experiment. So what I said was, if the head of that army, if the head of that person, of the head of that sentient, let's call it, because it's a thought experiment, doesn't feel the pain of the rest of his body, then it would be invincible fighting him. He will always head towards the trenches, because he doesn't feel the pain at the legs and at the hands. So all that you could do is, all that you could hope is, if the leg is cut off, or if the hand is cut off, then he will stop because he doesn't have anything to run with or anything to shoot his guns. But I added to that experiment, I added this thing. What if he had spare parts of legs, spare parts of hands, that you could easily replace and go ahead. So far as he doesn't feel the pain, then you couldn't be able to defeat such an enemy. Such is the Ethiopian army. The Amhara elite, the Ethiopian elite are totally disconnected from the pain of the masses in Ethiopia. They don't have an iota concern about how many Amharas are dying and how many Ethiopians are dying, so far as they feel that they are gaining on the enemy. So this is the problem that Tigray faces. So to me, one of the reasons why I focus on the Eritrea is Eritrea doesn't have that resource, doesn't have the opportunity to come up with 100,000 or 200,000 more. If Eritrea is defeated, it will end there. So that's one of the reasons I'm hoping that they will head towards the north. One is that. But another one is, if there is going to be a solution to this problem, it would have to be probably, if it is against Ethiopia, it would have to be more than the military thing. But that would take us, probably a half hour more discussion. But by that I mean economically, how do you weaken Ethiopia? Is also another topic that we could discuss, but let's leave it there for today.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you very much, Yosief Ghebrehiwet. This is very insightful, very incisive analysis of what is happening in Eritrea, what Eritrea is doing, and why it's doing that. We focused on that simply because it is the main driver and the engineer of this war. But that's not all, so we'll come to other issues in another edition. Thank you for the time, for the elaborate and very insightful discussion.
All right, thanks a lot. Okay, so thanks also for our listeners again. I hope you will call me back again. All right, thank
I
you.
will, sure.
All
My
right,
pleasure. Thank you very
all
much.
right, bye.